So I used the template that I also gave you for the palette guide, and I took a piece of watercolor paper and I took a Sharpie marker like this and did this black line on my watercolor paper. And then what I did, because I'm terrible at straight, absolutely terrible, I lined my watercolor paper up on top of my template, and then I took my 1/4 inch masking tape and just taped out the grid. That way, you know, I had a guide on either side and it was much easier for me. So that's just how I do it. You can do however is practical and makes sense to you. So what we're going to do is we are just going to paint our colors on our palette guide here. We're going to paint them so that they're full strength here going over the line, and then we're going to start watering it down so we get the range, what it looks like when we have full strength watercolor, if it's opaque or transparent by painting over the black line, and then we get the range of the color as we water it down towards the end of the paper here. That's in general my plan. And the way I set mine up, and you can set yours up however is practical for you, I always start with the red. That's just easy, I find, but again, that's just what I do. There's no, you know, practical reason for it. So I start with the red, and then I go in the direction of the clock and go down the colors until, you know, end up here with the burnt sienna. I'm going to start out just doing the 3 primary colors, so I have to leave some empty spaces, and I wanted to do that for those of you that are beginner watercolorists and that only maybe bought a few colors as I suggested, to not break the budget. So I'm going to show you how I would do that, and then I'm going to fill in. So that's how I'm going to do it. Here, if it was just, you know, for myself, I would just start here and then I'll just work my way down, because then I wouldn't have to count or anything. I'd just next color, next color, next color. But I'm going to try very, very hard to stay focused so I don't mess up. And I'm going to start up here with the red. So that's my quinacridone coral. Now, if that's not the red you're going with, you know, you obviously go with the whatever red, that one you consider your true red. And so I'm using my 1/2 inch dagger brush for this, and then I'm going to use my 3/4 inch flat brush from my Mimic Swirl set, and I'm going to start putting some water on, clean water from this end, and then I'm going to run it about 2/3 down, a little bit further, maybe 3/4 to the black stripe, and I can add a little bit more water at the end there. And then I'm going to, and I have to turn my paper around because of the angle for my hand, and I'm going to put this full strength quinacridone coral here over the black line, and now I'm going to hit where I put the water down. Can you see that? And now I'm going to start taking off a little bit of pigment by just dabbing my brush on my paper towel, because, you know, I want that nice gradation, and I'm going to take a little bit more off. So I run into the water here, and we're running down here, and now I'm going to take a little bit of water on my brush and actually rinse some of the pigment off so I can get this really nice light tone of the watercolor. Hope that made sense to you. We'll try and get as nice a gradation as possible, and I feel that maybe I got it a little bit concentrated right here. So I made my brush thirsty by just rinsing it and then squeezing out the water. Just pick up a little bit there. I think this is good enough. So that was our quinacridone red, and we're just going to let that dry and rinse out our brush. And then the next color is going to be, if we're just doing the 3 primary colors, French ultramarine blue, if that's your blue, or whatever blue that you have decided on. So I'll have to count here. So this is my red, and then 1, 2, 3 empty spots before I hit the French ultramarine blue. So that's 1, 2, 3. So that would be where I should put my French ultramarine blue, and I will get some of that out. I already have some here, and it's actually clean, but it's very watered down, so I think I'll make myself another puddle over here that's more concentrated. And I'm just going to leave it in the brush because I'm going to be painting with it in just a minute. And so here, that's where we decided that goes. And then I go down to about 3/4 here. Make sure I add extra water here at the end, because that's where I need it to be watered down some more. And here's my brush all loaded up with the French ultramarine blue, and then I start painting from the edge here and over my black line, so I can see how transparent or how opaque the color is. The more of the black you can see through, the more transparent the color is, and the more it obscures it, you know, the more opaque your color is. And I'm just working my way down, and it hit the water here, and I took some of my pigment out of my brush so I can kind of get it lighter and lighter as I move down. And now I'm gonna just rinse it out a little bit as I do the last bit and get it nice and light. There we go. That's pretty okay. So that was the blue. I'm gonna rinse my brush out. And then the next one I'm gonna put in is my third primary color, which is my transparent yellow or nickel azo yellow. So here's my French ultramarine blue. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the fifth after the French ultramarine blue. So 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5. This one here. And again, I have yellow out already. See, it's here. Make sure your brush is really clean. I need to put just a hint of more water on so I can kind of dissolve it. Now the transparent yellow does not look all that great when it's like really full strength because it is a transparent color. There's so much pigment in it. But as you water it down, you'll see it is glorious. So we decided it was 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5. I'm so afraid of messing this up. I mean, not afraid, but I mean, I would mess this up in a heartbeat, I'm telling you. So of course I get sidetracked to think of other things, but not now. Concentrating. So lots of water in there, and then let's go down to about 3/4. Lots of water there. And here we have our loaded brush. And again, apologize, I just have to turn it around because otherwise I just can't do it without, contorting my wrist or having it exactly over the lens so you can't see a darn thing. So here, full strength, transparent yellow, full strength over the line here. It's very, very loaded with pigment. Transparent yellow is. So it's kind of almost orangey when you put it on so full strength. And now it's hitting the water. Can you see how it's already beginning to be like absolutely gloriously brilliant yellow? And now I have to start taking off some of the pigment. Put a little bit of water on as we move down. And now I need to basically rinse it out. Almost completely clean, but not quite. And let's just pull it down the last bit here. There. So that's what your color grid would look like if you just bought the first 3 primary colors: quinacridone red, French ultramarine blue, and transparent yellow or nickel azo yellow. That would be your color chart. And I would just put it on like this and, just tape it down with some blue tape, a little bit wider if you have it. Or you could also tape it down with, if you have washi tape, because that comes off easily without ripping anything. Because then as you added colors on, you can plot them in where they go. So that's the whole idea for this. So let's just continue our thought here. So if you decided you wanted to start out with the 6 primary colors, so a cool and a warm of each. So here we have red, warm blue, and cool yellow compared to what I'm gonna put on. So I could start, now it doesn't really matter where I start. Let me just start down here by the yellow. So my yellow that I would add on would be this one here, which is my New Gamboge. So you can see that's warmer than the transparent yellow that I have on. So I'm gonna clean up here. The whole idea is you gotta be clean, 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 clean. I once took a class with a watercolor artist and she had this saying, cleanliness is next to godliness in watercolor. That's what she always said. So here, get some of that pure, beautiful, but not nearly as transparent yellow out. And that is right next to my transparent yellow and that New Gamboge. And then there's one in between, and that's this spot here, and that's the burnt sienna. And then we're back to the red, which is up there, just so you know what I'm doing. And so here, I'm gonna put the water on again, 3/4 down. And, I always give it a couple of strokes so that I'm sure that the water doesn't dry out before I am ready. Okie dokie. And then because we have this nice masking tape in between, I don't even have to worry about if my transparent yellow is dry, because my tape protects it. And so here I'm painting over the black line, and now I'm hitting the water, and you can see how the yellow also gets lighter. And now I want to take some of the pigment off and then continue down. And now I want to rinse it out a little bit and just do the last bit so that I get that really nice light yellow. There we have that. And then the red, we have a warm red, so we would want a cool red, which means a pink. And so in this case, that's my permanent rose, or if you have quinacridone rose, this is also a cool pink. And we are gonna have to find a spot for that one. Let's just clean up here, make sure it's clean. Okay, got my permanent rose ready, and now I'm going to, whoopsie, I almost made a boo-boo here. This is of course not where the permanent rose goes. It goes up here next to the quinacridone coral. And then let's get some water on, 3/4 way, and a little bit more water here. I think that's good. And got my brush loaded, and let's put that color on next to the quinacridone coral. And there, once it's dry, you will see that there's a difference. One's pink and one is more like fire engine red. Paper around. I know some of you don't like that I do that, but trust me, it's an important thing to just flip your paper or your painting around so that you have as easy access as possible without contorting your wrist or getting your hands in wet paint, because that's just not a lot of fun when that happens. So just take some of the pigment off as we go out here, and now I want to take most of it off. It's a very, very pigment loaded color, the permanent rose. All right, I think that's pretty good, and I'm going to rinse my brush. And then the cool blue that we would have on our palette depends a little bit on what you chose, of course, but I chose the primary blue cyan from Mermaid Blue, so that's kind of it's a new color to me also. That goes next, does not go next to the French ultramarine blue, because then I have cobalt blue, I have indigo, and then I have that blue. So there's 1, 2 in between. So let's make sure we do that right. 1, 2, and then here it is. Don't want to mess that up. And now I just have to clean up somewhere and then get that color out. It's this color here. Let's get some clean water. So again, let's make sure we stay on the straight and narrow, 2 away from there, and it's 1 color away from the transparent yellow. So here we go, 3/4 up, lots of water down there, and it's a very, very, very strong and dominant color. And it would also be in other brands. It's the same pigment as Phthalo Blue Green Shade 15:3. So if you can't find this one here, you can go with one of those. And it's actually a color that I originally had on my palette, and then I took it off my palette again because I found that my beginner students, they really had a lot of trouble controlling this color, because it is a little bit, it's a very dominant color, so it can really take over very quickly. So that's just a little warning. And I had Antwerp Blue on instead, and unfortunately what I found out with Antwerp Blue by doing some light fastness tests is that Antwerp Blue has a tendency to fade a lot in light. And then the weird thing that happens, and I've heard it other painters that do this kind of color testing also, if you put it in a dark closet or in your binder or whatever and let it sit for a while, then it goes back to its original darker color. So it's the weirdest thing. So that's why I have not added it on this new palette. Beautiful color. And can you see the difference? See how this one's a much warmer blue, it's more like purpley, and then this one's a much cooler blue because it's more turquoisey, and that's why it's closer to yellow. And this one is a warm red, so it's more fire engine red, it's actually closer to yellow. And then this one's a cool red, it's more pink, and it's closer to blue. That's how that works. And then this one is a cool yellow compared to this one, which is a warm yellow. This one's more on the orange side, so more towards red, and this one is more towards blue side, so it's a cooler yellow. That's how we define those. But cool and warm, don't get too confused or too concerned about that, because you know it really is relative. Compared to what? So for instance, if I compare this warm blue, French ultramarine blue, with the pink here, well then this one's cooler. Whereas if I compare this blue with the other blue I have, then it's warmer. You see what I'm saying? So warm and cool is compared to what? Alright, so here you would have a split primary color where you have a warm and a cool of each of the 3 primary colors. And a lot of people, they like to have a palette like that, and that's definitely also a wonderful palette to start out with. And actually from several of the watercolor paint manufacturers, you can actually get sets where they have 6 colors in there, a warm and a cool of each. They won't necessarily be exactly the same colors that I chose, but those would also be great to go with, especially Daniel Smith. They have really good split primary color set to start with the 6 colors. So then the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to fill in the blank, so to speak, with the remaining colors. So that's going to be next. Okay, so now I'm going to put the colors on in the order I would buy them if I was starting out with the knowledge I have today. And my next color would most likely be the burnt sienna. You could also go with the Daniel Smith quinacridone burnt orange. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the burnt sienna from Daniel Smith, but you know, just because I'm not a fan doesn't mean you can't be a fan. But it looks quite a bit different than this one here, and this is the one I like. It's a single pigment color like all the others I have on so far. Okay, so there is that mixed up, and then we're gonna put the water on, and the burnt sienna goes down here. Looks like I got some bleeding down here, who knows. All right, just put a little bit more water on there, and here it is, burnt sienna. Sure we get it full strength. This color together with French ultramarine blue is such a useful combination. It will give you a lot of different browns and grays, so I'm a big fan of that. Now we have to water it down as we go down here. Take more of the pigment off, add a little bit of water, and there we go, all the way down there. It's a beautiful color also. It's great for a lot of things when you're painting nature. It also, together with the cool blue, phthalo blue, or here in my case, primary blue cyan, makes fantastic evergreen colors. And you'll find that out once you do one of those mixing charts that I have given you in your package here. We'll talk a little bit about that in another section, in another little class in this series. So there's that, and you can see how it's basically what it is. This is a dirty orange, so it's a very orangey brown. The next color I would pick, it's going to be a little bit of a toss-up. I'm going to say either the cobalt blue or the indigo. So I decided to go with the cobalt blue, but you know, how you pick your next colors is very much personal preference. And as you can see, I do have quite a bit of blue on my palette. I'm a blue person, I guess. I love blues, and I find them very useful in my paintings for the colors and the subject matter that I personally paint a lot. So a lot of nature scenes, everything nature inspired, including some birds, some animals, flowers, that kind of stuff. All right, so I got my brush already loaded up with the cobalt, and the cobalt goes here because cobalt is really more of a true blue. It's just the only thing about it is it's light, so it's not a good blue to have if that's the only blue you have, because it would prevent you from being able to mix any darks. We do need darks. You know, you can mix it just like you can with the French ultramarine blue with the burnt sienna and get some beautiful browns and especially grays that are a little bit of a different tone than with the French ultramarine blue. Softer, because it's a softer color. Okay, I need to take some more of that pigment out and move down here. This is a fantastic color for skies too. I'm sure you can almost tell, right? So let's just go all the way down here and let's get a little bit more pigment in here. So it always helps when you talk to yourself while you paint. So there you are, there's a little thing there. I think this is good. So there we have cobalt blue, beautiful color, and you'll see when it dries, it's going to dry lighter. So I'm sure you can imagine there's no way you can mix that and have that create a black when you mix red and yellow into it, because that's how you make black, is mixing the three primary colors together, red, blue and yellow. But the cobalt would not get you a black. The darkest you could go was a gray. The next color I have decided to put in is my permanent magenta. So that's next to my French ultramarine blue. So it is a reddish purple, I would call it. And it's just a wonderful color for many things. But especially the reason I have it mainly is that it is a wonderful color to darken your reds with without having them end up looking purple or brownish if you're trying to darken them with another color. So again, nothing's wet, so I can have my hand over here. That in full strength. So it's a beautiful color. It's kind of like a burgundy color, and it's also a single pigment color. And if you put yellow in it, for instance, it becomes a beautiful reddish brown. And of course, if you put more blue in it, you get some really beautiful purple. So it's a versatile color, and it's a good color, I find, to have on your palette. Didn't put that much water in it. Feel. So better go quick. Get some of the pigment out and then start here. There we go. There. That was the permanent magenta. So the next color I want to paint on my color guide here is the indigo, and it's going to go here. I already put the water on. It's an extremely dark, strong, very pigmented color. And I love having it on my palette because it makes wonderful evergreen greens. And when you want to have a really dark color, it's just so easy if you have indigo on. And it's a dark blue. My indigo is the one from Winsor Newton. That's the one I prefer. It's the bluest of the ones that are out there, I feel. It is dual, no, I think there's 3 pigments in here. We'll talk about that when we get to that. But, you know, it's not a single pigment color, but none of the indigos that I have run across are. And they're all very different from different brands. So if you have from a different brand, it's going to, you know, react and do a little bit differently than mine, but it doesn't matter. It's also a great, great color for like stormy skies. Can you almost see that here where we get the little bit more the light version of it? But you can see it goes from looking almost black and then goes into these wonderful moody blues. There we have that one. And now we only have 2 colors left, and those are kind of 2 fun colors, and those are the 2 where I would say you might choose some other colors. I mean, they're more just fun. Don't have to have them, even though I will say, especially we're going to go in and we're going to put the Opera Rose on, and then the last one is this teal color. So we're going to put the Opera Rose on here, and as I said before, this is kind of more personal preference colors. These, especially these last 2, I use the Opera Rose quite a bit, especially my florals and also in landscapes. If there's a sunset or a sunrise, it makes for beautiful pinks and purples and lavender and oranges when it's mixed with the blues or with yellow. The transparent yellow and the Opera Rose make a fantastic orange glowing sky, for instance, and florals, as I said. So here we go, and I'm just gonna finish this off for you. Just want to make sure that I don't get my hands in the wet paint and drag it out. Now the Opera Rose is known to not be super light fast, just so you know that. The reason I'm using the Opera Rose from Holbein is that I did a test of the Opera Roses that I have, and the Holbein came out on top with very little fading after extended time in my south window with constant sun on it. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable using it in my paintings, but that's a personal preference, and if that scares you, you should not choose this color. Just wanted to let you know. All right, so there we have the Opera Rose. As you can see, it's like almost a neon color. And the last one I am going to show you is the teal, and this teal is one from M. Graham. And the only thing I want to mention about that color is that it does have a slight separation when it's in the well here. Don't worry about that. It comes back together again. And it is a single pigment color. But the other thing about M. Graham colors is that they are honey based, and so it's like it never really completely dries. So it stays kind of runny in the palette. And if you are planning to travel with your palette a lot, that's just something to think about. And you can find teals in other brands. They're not going to be exactly this one, but there's lots of great teals out there. So it's also just, you know, a fun color. I enjoy having it living here at Lake Tahoe. We have the lake is so beautiful, and they, you know, there's with those turquoise colors, or if you're in a tropical area, you want to paint tropical scenes, then a teal is a wonderful color to have. And it's a new color. It's not one that I used to have on my palette, but I've decided that I like teal a lot, so I was going to go with that one for my last color here. Felt I had room for a teal, and you can see it's definitely opaque, or not opaque, but it's not nearly as transparent. I think it's probably the most opaque of the colors that I have on my palette. I tend to like the transparent colors best. Not that there's anything wrong with the colors that have some opacity to them. It's just something to keep in mind. And looks like I need a little bit more water here just to make it flow out some of the color off. And there we have it. So now I have to let it dry, because the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to lift out so we can see how staining or easily liftable the colors are. And I need everything to be dry for that. And then we're going to use some masking tape and a scrubber brush, or not really a scrubber brush. What I like to use is the one that's meant for masking fluid application. I'll show you. So here you can see this is the brush that I like to use for trying to lift out out color. It's not a scrubber brush. It is a short, flat, half-inch brush, and it's a masking fluid brush from Creative Mark. And I buy them in packs of, there's like 5 of these in, and then there's 5 little round ones, and they're meant for masking fluid application. And sometimes I'll use them for that, but most of the time I just use them for this kind of lifting out, and it doesn't damage the paper because it's not a super stiff brush, but it's stiffer than a normal painting watercolor brush. Okay, everything's dry. Make sure it's dry before you put any masking tape on, otherwise it's not gonna go well. So I'm just gonna put on here and press it down. And we leave about 1/8 of an inch or something like that in between for our area where we can lift out the color. And I do it on the side where we have the full strength. And then I use this brush. I use some Kleenex. I dab my brush in clean water, and then I dab it over here. It's just damp, not dripping wet, just damp. And then I gently scrub like this, and then I dab like that. And then I rinse my brush, do the same thing, just a damp brush, not dripping wet. I scrub one more time like this and dab. I still got some pigment off, and one more time we rinse and we dab the brush so that it's not dripping wet, and then we give it a 3rd scrub. There you have it, and you can see I got that lifted back to not completely white, but you know, decent. And I'm gonna do that all the way down, and that's super boring to watch, so I'm gonna continue here off camera, and then when we are done with that, we'll reconvene. Now I did them all 12 colors that I have on my palette, and there you can see them. And then be gentle. You know, anytime you remove this masking tape from anything that you're painting on, be gentle. So I carefully remove it, and here the other one. Again, careful, careful. And there you can see. And that gives us a nice indication of how staining or non-staining a color is. So you can see here our quinacridone coral, definitely a staining color, and so is the permanent rose. The opera rose is not staining, but the permanent magenta sure is. The French ultramarine blue is not staining. It lifts almost back to white, and so does the cobalt blue, but not so much the indigo. Neither does the phthalo blue, or here the one I have, which is called primary blue cyan. And then we have the cobalt teal, lifts back just like the cobalt blue. And we have our transparent yellow staining, and we also have our new gamboge, doesn't lift all the way back either, but we get a pretty good lift out on our burnt sienna from Winsor Newton. And now it's time to take our other masking tapes off in between the colors, and again, you be careful. And I'm going to take all those off, and then all we have left to do is to write the names of our colors and put it on the lid of our palette, and that way we have a nice color guide that lets us know exactly what colors we have in our palette, and that way it's easy for us to refill, and it's also easy for us to see what color would maybe suit a certain subject matter that you're painting, and you have the information on both how transparent or how opaque it is, and also how easily or how difficult it is to lift it. And those are very, very good things to know when you are painting, because that makes your life so much easier. That, for instance, if you know you're going to lift out a bunch of highlights or other things in your painting, if you choose a very staining color, well, you're going to have a hard time. So that's why I like to have that information. So let me take these other little 1/4 inch masking tapes in between the colors off, and then we'll take a look. So here you can see I've taken all the masking tapes off, and I have a nice color guide for my palette, and all I need to do now is find myself a black Sharpie and write the names and the brand on. So I want to use a Sharpie to write the names and the brand, and I can choose to either write it on top of each color, or I can write it on the white spaces, whatever, you know, floats your boat. I think this time I usually write it on top of the color, but maybe this time I'll write it up here. So this one is quinacridone coral. So I'm just going to write Quinn Hall, and that's from Daniel Smith. So I'm going to write DS. And this one is permanent, and I'm just going to write permanent rose, and that's from Winsor Newton, so I'm going to write WN, and so on and so forth. So there you can see I wrote all the names in my best handwriting, trying to make it straight. I have the darndest time with that kind of stuff. And then the last thing I think I would like to do is just on the color itself, I'm going to write the pigment numbers, and I'm going to use my, you can just look at the tubes, that's where it says the pigment numbers, and I can also look at the little swatches I have in my swatch book. That's the last thing I want to do before I tape it on. So I found all the numbers and wrote them on underneath each color name on the color themselves. And Quinacridone Coral from Daniel Smith is PR, so that's pigment red 209. The permanent rose from Winsor Newton is PV19, that means pigment violet 19. Opera rose from Holbein is BV10 and PR122. PR122 is pigment rose, and BV, I'm not quite sure what that is. I think that's, that's thing that makes it so neon bright, and that's also the thing that probably makes it a little bit more fugitive as far as I understand. Then my permanent magenta from Winsor Newton is PV19, which is actually the same pigment as my permanent rose from Winsor Newton, but you can see the same pigment number can often be treated, I don't know how, but in a way so that it actually can look different. Then here we have my French ultramarine blue from Winsor Newton, that's PB, so that's pigment blue 29. And the cobalt blue from Winsor Newton is PB 28. And then my indigo is my other color apart from my opera rose that is a combination of pigments. It's PBK6, that's pigment black number 6, PV19, which is pigment violet 19, which is the same as the permanent rose and the permanent magenta, and then finally PB15, which is the same as phthalo blue. And so there's 3 pigments in here. And in the primary blue cyan from My Merry Blue, it's PB15:3, which is pigment blue 15:3 is a phthalo blue green shade. And then cobalt teal from M. Graham is PB28. It's a cobalt, so you can see cobalt. The cobalt can be treated so that it looks like the cobalt blue here or the cobalt teal there. And I think there's a couple of other variations too. Then we come to my favorite yellow, which is the transparent yellow from Winsor Newton. Or it could also just as well have been the Nichols yellow from one of the other good brands like Daniel Smith. Either way, they are PY150, and it's a transparent yellow, that's why I love it. And then my warm yellow New Gamboge from Daniel Smith is a single pigment color, also PY153. And then finally my burnt sienna from Winsor Newton is PR101, so that's pigment red 101. So that's a little bit different than some of the other burnt siennas from different brands. And the reason I like this one the best is because I'm used to it. I like that it's single pigment, and I like the color, and you can find other burnt siennas or other colors such as quinacridone burnt orange or quinacridone burnt scarlet that are single pigment colors, but some of the other brands, their burnt sienna is a mixture, and I don't like that. So anyway, there were some my choices, and you can of course choose whatever you like, and you don't have to worry about all these pigment numbers and stuff like that. It's just because now I've been painting with watercolor for many years, soon I can say almost 20, my goodness. And as you learn more and more, then this becomes more interesting. I couldn't care less when I was beginning with watercolor about all that stuff. But what's important for you is to know your colors, so you know if they're staining or non-staining. And it's also good to start out with few colors. We already talked about that, so don't feel that you have to have 12 colors. Remember, when we set out to paint this, I showed you that you just need the 3 primary colors, and we're going to get to that next when we do the color wheel. So I just wanted to show you that I just got a really bright idea, I think. In the past, I've just taped down my color guide onto my palette, and actually I've taped over the whole thing with packing tape that's clear so I could see through. The only bad thing about it is, of course, I can't remove it because I would rip my guide. And so So I thought, what if I use one of these sheet protectors and then just cut it down to size. I already cut this end off and I put my guide inside, and now I'm going to trim it down so that it's maybe there's I don't know, 1/8 of an inch or something extra around, and then I can tape it down to my palette. And if I ever needed to make a new guide, I can take this one off and it's not destroyed. So I think this is a good idea. So let me just cut the other two sides down and then I'll tape it on. So here you can see I cut it down, and now I'm going to take my palette and line it up. There we go. And then I'm going to take my packing tape and tape it down just around the edges. You can use a credit card if you want to have something to just press it down real good. Get air bubbles out if there's any of those. It all depends on how snickety you want to be. And I used my X-Acto knife to just trim off the packing tape there. And now I'm going to go ahead and take down the other side nice and flat. And I can use my scissors just to trim off the edges. And my credit card. And then I'm just going to fold it down. There we go. And use my X-Acto knife to just trim off this extra bit. There. And I'm going to tape it on the other ends too. And then we're done. And we have an absolutely perfect color guide. And the nice thing about it is that, sometimes what happens is, you splatter water or paint or whatever on it, and then it can just be wiped down. And I really love this idea of me being able to take out my color guide. Also if, your palette gets old and beat up and you need to start a new palette, you have your color guide. You don't have to start all from scratch. So I hope you found this helpful and you're now ready to start painting with your new watercolor setup.